It's
Very happy to be here with you all. And I think it's a great conversation. We were just talking right before some of you joined about how daylight savings just happened. So even coping with that change can be hard for some people. So excited to hop right in and do our check-in. So for those of you who are new, we always like to check in. We do a fun little animal scale. So if you could please go around and share your name and on a scale of cats, how you're feeling today and then something good that happened to you this week. So I can go first, just so you guys get a feel for it. My name is Valerie. Oops, my cats went away.
Ah,
Okay, my name
okay.
is Valerie. I'm feeling a little bit like a three. I'm still a little tired. I feel like my hour was robbed. An hour of sleep was robbed from me. And something good that happened to me. I went to the Colorado Mammoth lacrosse game on Saturday, and the halftime show was a corgi race. So that's my one good thing that happened to me this week. I got to watch corgis race. So just feel free to
Oh,
hop in and share yours.
I'm Beth. I'm a number three. With that nice yawn, again, this is hard, the daylight savings. But my happy thing to share is that, and I want to put a little plug on for some of these little help talks, is that we had a great last month about food. We worked with it was AJ. Sorry, healthy eating over the age of 50. And there was some great recipes shared, and I was inspired. And I actually made some they're cabbage wedges for my family this weekend,
Ooh.
and they loved them. And it was just simple roasted cabbage, and I put a little Israeli salad on the side, and they loved it. And that was a highlight of my weekend, is was preparing a very healthy meal that everyone thoroughly enjoyed.
Wow, that sounds real. I might need the recipe to that. That sounds really good. Thanks for sharing, Beth.
All right. So I'm sure you have seen this slide before with group agreements. You never know what kind of room of troublemakers you're in. So it's always better to say these things rather than leave them unsaid. We think it's good for any group you have, especially we work in mental health. So it just makes sense that we practice what we preach. But a lot of times people just setting the ground rules at the beginning or the expectations is not usually a bad thing. Usually it avoids some problems rather than, it's kind of like setting boundaries. We don't want to wait until they're crossed in order to set them. We kind of want to do it up front if possible. So we like to set the tone, confidentiality, kind of like Vegas. What happens here stays here. You share what you learn, not what you hear. Be present and minimize distractions, but we are virtual and you will likely need to use the restroom or you'll get a visitor or a phone call or something, and no problem, just take care of yourself. No judgment, listen generously, respect yourself and others, and then take what you need and participate as you would like. We're all in different uh, areas, phases of our week. We woke up as different cats this morning. So some of us are in a great place to sit and absorb. Some of us are in a great place to chat. Whatever feels comfortable to you works for us.
So now I'm going to go through a breathing exercise. If you want, you can turn off your cameras during this, close your eyes, just get comfortable while I read this out loud, and it'll relate to our larger conversation. So just get comfortable in your seats, close your eyes. And this one's called A Carrot, an Egg, and a Cup of Coffee. A young woman went to her mother and told her about her life and how things were so hard for her. She did not know how she was going to make it, and she wanted to give up. She was tired of fighting and struggling, and it seemed that as one problem was solved, a new one arose. Her mother took her to the kitchen. She filled 3 pots with water and placed each on a high fire. Soon the pots came to a boil. In the first, she placed carrots. In the second, she placed eggs. And in the last, she placed ground coffee beans. She let them sit and boil without saying a word. In about 20 minutes, she turned off the burners. She fished the carrots out and placed them in a bowl. She pulled the eggs out and placed them in a bowl. And then she ladled the coffee out and placed it in a bowl. Turning to her daughter, she asked, "Tell me, what do you see?" Carrots, eggs, and coffee, the daughter replied. Her mother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did and noted that they were soft. The mother then asked the daughter to take an egg and break it. After pulling off the shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg. Finally, the mother asked the daughter to sip the coffee. The daughter smiled as she tasted its rich aroma. But then the daughter asked, "What does it mean, mother?" Her mother explained that each of these objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water, and yet each had reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to the boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had protected its liquid interior, but after sitting through the boiling water, its inside became hardened. The ground coffee beans were unique, however. After they were in the boiling water, they had changed the water itself. "Which are you?" she asked her daughter. "When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean?" So now I invite you to think of this. Which am I? Am I the carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity I wilt and become soft and lose my strength? Am I the egg that starts with a malleable heart but changes with the heat? Did I have a fluid spirit, but after a death, a breakup, or a financial hardship, or some other trial, have I become hardened and stiff? Does my shell look the same, but on the inside, am I bitter and tough with a stiff spirit and hardened heart? Or am I like the coffee bean? The bean actually changes the hot water, the very circumstance that brings the pain. When the water gets hot, it releases the fragrance and flavor. If you are like the bean, when things are at their worst, do you get better and change the situation around you? When the hour is darkest and trials are their greatest, do you elevate yourself to another level? How do you handle adversity? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? May you have enough happiness to make you sweet, enough trials to make you strong, enough sorrow to keep you human, and enough hope to make you happy. The happiest of people don't necessarily have the best of everything. They just make the most of everything that comes along their way. The brightest future will always be based on a forgotten past. You can't go forward in life until you let go of your past failures and heartaches. So now you can slowly open your eyes and come back to the room. And again, that was a reading called A Carrot, an Egg, and a Cup of Coffee. Any initial reactions? How'd you guys feel about that? Anything stick out to you, or yeah, any reflections? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think thank you for speaking up for the carrot. I think each one has its place, right? And I think ideally we would always change and adapt, but sometimes that can be really hard or it's not the right thing at the moment. So thanks for that, Bruce. Great. Well, I will pass it back to Allie to talk more about change.
Yeah, so Valerie sets us up, and the story sets us up very nicely for talking about change, which is not, again, the most fun topic to talk about. Change, no matter what it is hard. Change in the weather, daylight savings, change that we know is coming versus change that may happen upon us, may take us by surprise. It's all really hard, but unfortunately, it's one of those constants in life too. There's always going to be change, which is the good news and the bad news. The bad news is it's always going to be there. The good news is it's always there and you've done it before. But talking about what aspects of it are hard, the daylight savings, for example, you know it's coming, same time every year. It's on our calendars. You can even see when it's coming next year. But the little shift in our day that we don't really get to choose is more forced upon us, forces us to switch our schedules, how we go about our day. If I kept my same schedule when this change happened and tried to resist the change, I'm probably doing myself more a disservice than I am a service of trying to keep it the same for my own sake. So there's a lot of reasons change is difficult. Why else is change hard? And it's not a trick question. Change is hard for a lot of reasons, but why else? Change and resiliency, that's the name of this presentation. Changes is hard. We can talk about it all day. And we do. We talk about it with our support systems, with people that are in the same faith as us, where you talk about it with our coworkers, our neighbors. Um, Change, no matter what, can be difficult. What we rely on is our coping skills and our past experiences to get us through. The idea that if we could just never have any big changes happen ever again, most of us would make that decision or would choose a life that is we can foresee everything that's going to happen. Um, but change is not, it doesn't work like that. And humans are we're built to withstand a lot. But like you were talking about, our past experiences, what's worked for us before, what hasn't worked for us before, is huge in learning how we go forward, how we try to work with some of the change that we have. Um, we're going to talk about it in a few different ways. There's some change or there's some coping that we can do in the moment that just gets us through the day to day. And then the bigger word that we're talking about today, resiliency, is that idea that everything I've learned, all of the experiences I've had, all of the trial and errors, it lives inside of my body and my brain. I just have to use it. I have to figure out what um, parts of it work for me now? What parts of it would I change? How did it make me feel? How did it affect the outcome? And then how can I use it next time I'm faced with something? Um, which again, this is all going to be much easier said than done when we put it on a nice little PowerPoint slide and sit here and talk about it for an hour. It is much harder in practice. Um,
Yeah.
but Valerie's going to walk us through the coping. It may sound like they're just band-aids on this on the problem, but they're really just so important in maintaining our resiliency. So Valerie will walk us through that.
Yeah, so as you guys have been saying, coping skills are so important in helping us deal with change. And coping skills are behaviors that help us deal with internal or external situations. And they're an intentional practice or technique that we use when we're stressed. And I'm sure we all have different ways that we cope already. Some of them may be healthy, some of them may not be so healthy. Some of us may have been using these for years, even decades. However, we need to sometimes stop and think about, is it still working for us? Should I still be using these coping skills? Or maybe is there something that could help me a little bit more? And so when talking about coping skills, they're generally categorized into four major categories, and they're here on the screen. The first one is problem-focused coping, and that one, as the name suggests, addresses the problem that's causing you the distress. So this means that you're actively coping and you're trying to plan ahead and maybe suppress competing activities so that you can again solve that problem. The next one is emotion-focused coping, and this aims to reduce the negative emotions that you're feeling about the change. So, some ways that you might do that is maybe reframing the situation in a more positive light, maybe just accepting it, turning to religion or faith, turning to humor. So, again, you're trying to kind of flip the emotions so that you feel more positively, or not even more positively, but you're just accepting the situation instead. The third one is meaning focused coping. And this is where you use cognitive strategies to try to find some meaning out of the situation. So you're seeing the problem in front of you and you're trying to find some lesson that you can take away from it or some kind of meaning that you can take away from it. And the final one is social coping, sometimes called support seeking. And this is where you try to reduce the stress or, the distress that you're facing by seeking emotional or support from your community or the people around you. So these are kind of the four basic categories. And I know maybe some of us use a couple of them, maybe some of us stick to one or the other. So I'm just curious, which one of these categories, do you guys lean more on? Is there anyone that stuck out to you guys? Tend to lean more on one, but the situation calls for you to use a couple of them. So I think that's exactly right. And being, aware of kind of what you need in that moment is super important too. So thanks for sharing. I will pass it back to Allie for the next slide about coping skills.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that you probably do a lot of these things. You probably have some emotion focused or problem focused coping skills that you lean on. That maybe you just don't know that that's what they are. We just haven't recognized them as coping skills yet. Like planning and organizing is a coping skill. It helps you reduce stress. It helps you think of all the what ifs, all of the possibilities. If I plan as much as I can, that means when that situation happens, I've gone through all of my resources. I know what's available to me. I know what to do if A, then B. Um, and it can help people feel like problem focused or problem focused coping of I've done everything I can up until the problem happens, and then we get to um, fix the problem then on, or we get to use all the resources that we have at our disposal. Um, but it really can be a coping skill. And I know there's some type A folks in the room that just, if you can make a plan for it, you're going to. Um, if you're not that person, then you are the type B person and you have the type A spouse or best friend. They always go together, right? Mindfulness is a great coping skill. It's a little bit more maybe emotion focused coping or meaning focused coping. But mindfulness is a great way to manage that stress, that anxiety that we feel. Really turn it towards ourselves and say, if I can't fix the outside world and what's happening, I'm going to focus on making myself the best version of myself I can be today so I can deal with it, whatever
Yeah.
comes my way. The best way I put this is if think about those days where you haven't eaten breakfast, you haven't had any water, and you didn't get a good night of sleep. Are you going to be your best self that day? Probably not. I'm not even my best self if I just don't have one of those things, let alone all three. So if we can put ourselves in the best space we can, physically and mentally, it may not change what's happening in the outside world, but maybe we can change a little bit and be our best self so we can deal with it. Um, Mindfulness is a great trick to help us check in with ourselves and kind of manage some of that. Routines are great because we're just adults are big kids, right? Just like kids need a structure, we need schedules. So do adults. We love our routines. I'm sure there's somebody in the room has the same morning routine today that they did 10, 15, 20 years ago. Maybe it just serves you very well. It's the way you like to start your morning. If you are a morning routine person, what is your day like when you don't get to do that morning routine? It may not be the worst day of your life, but you might feel a little bit off. So those routines and that structure really can help us feel like if I don't have to use all of my critical thinking skills to figure out what to have for breakfast in the morning, what I'm going to wear, what my morning's going to be like, I can use all of that brain power somewhere else. Gratitude, Claudia, you mentioned it before. I think a few people have probably mentioned it. Gratitude is a great coping skill to use. It is another way to look at the external world just a little bit differently. There's always something to be grateful for. It's not always a great time or place to use it. If I were to tell you March of 2020, if I were to say, let's all find something we're grateful for right now in this quarantine. A lot of you would have looked at me and said, what are you doing, Allie? That is not the time for this. You're probably right. So gratitude is more, some of these, including gratitude, are a little bit just checking in what works for us in the moment, in the space that we're in, for the situation that we're in. But I can also see the argument that there's always a time for some gratitude, whether that just be internally with yourself, maybe you write it down in a journal or on your phone or in a little notebook. Um, but it can definitely help you see the world a little bit more and help with that maybe meaning focused coping. Spirituality is a great coping skill. It does a lot for us. And it can be super individualized, whatever that means to you, which is the great news, is whatever you need it to do or however you want it to look, you absolutely can make it that way. And it may change over depending on where you are at in life physically and mentally. It could depend on what your routines are, what your community looks like right now. And connection too. A connection is a huge coping skill that sometimes humans, we love to think this is a very hard emotion, and instead of burdening other people with it, I'm going to sit at home by myself and just deal with it myself. Which I understand the logic behind it, but humans need other humans, and very rarely are we that much of a burden to others that we could not simply connect with them. We also love to bond over the bad. Let's remember that bonding over the good does a lot for us. Even if we've had a really hard day, finding that one thing that made you smile, that one thing that went well, or just listening to stories of something silly your grandchild said or somebody else's grandchild said, um, it can have an impact on us, even if it's not directly involving us. So these are just some coping skills that sometimes we just don't think of as coping skills, but they all serve a place and purpose. And when we do them intentionally, we can really shift the narrative. Um, Maybe not entirely and maybe not solve all of the world's problems, but hopefully we can be our best self in order to tackle those problems head on. And this is all building up to what we call resiliency. And resiliency is such a buzzword. It's one of those trendy words like burnout or self-care. But it's really important to think of how am I working towards my resiliency? What is it? And how does it play a role in my mental health? So Valerie is going to start that combo.
Yeah, so as Ali started us off, resiliency again, it's a big word, but it has two main meanings. So the first one is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulty or adversity, right? So this is our toughness. And resiliency also means the ability to spring back into shape. So our elasticity. And so again, the goal is not just to feel better, but it's to become better. And that's where resiliency comes in. We've all experienced things not going as planned. You guys already shared examples of big changes that happened in your life that were out of your control. But what I also heard in all your stories was that you guys bounced back from that, right? You guys were able to adapt to that change. And as some of you said, learn from it or, even find new ways to adapt to things that you really had not expected. And as Ali mentioned before, we're all born with the capacity for resiliency. It's just part of being human. We're all born with some level of resiliency. But the more we live life and the more we deal with adversity and changes, the better we get at, either coping with it, learning from it, and springing back and really bouncing back into our lives. So again, it's really important to really build that resiliency and learn how to be calm, clear, and capable when we face adversity. Learn how to not deny strong emotions when you're going through change, because as we know, change is really hard and it can be really difficult. And when we practice healthy coping skills and when we ask for help when we need it, when we adapt to environments that are new and big changes, that's how we're strengthening our resiliency, which is the whole goal here. So when a big change happens down the road that you weren't expected, you already have those tools and skills to get through it. And it might even be a little bit easier this time because you've kind of learned some of those things. Um, and so, similar to what we've been talking about, resiliency kind of has five themes. When we look at the literature, we look at optimism, which some of you guys have talked about, reframing things in a positive way, leading with hope. We talk about adaptability. So, adapting to those changes and finding new ways to deal with that. Coping skills, which we've talked about. Social support, you guys have mentioned, really seeking other people to help you through those changes or asking for help when you need it. And the last one is self-care, taking care of yourself through it, because although we might be resilient and we might be able to get through change, it can be exhausting on our bodies and on our mental health. And so, again, resiliency is something that we can continue to strengthen. And the more we go through it, the better we get at it. So, we always like to think about like how when babies are learning to walk, they'll fall down hundreds of times, but they always try to get back up, right? They always get back on their feet. And maybe it was a little scary. Maybe they cry the first couple of times, but you will always see them trying to get back up and get those first steps in. So even that is an example of how resilient we are, even from being tiny little babies to being adults and kind of taking that with you and really learning how to get back up when life kind of shoves you down. So we can strengthen resiliency at any point in our life. And it just takes time and patience and belief. And, just like this little plant in the picture, plants go through storms, they go through dry spells, they go through all kinds of things. And you still see them growing. Like you see nature growing out of maybe some unexpected spots sometimes too. And, roses growing in sidewalks, things like that, because life finds a way and we all find ways to adapt and to keep growing through it. So again, we talk about resiliency because sometimes life can be really hard. We can see people going through tough things, and it's really important to try to get back to it and kind of use the skills that you have and use the people around you to help you get through it. And so we know that, talking about it can seem kind of small, but because a lot of us have lived through it already. But we wanted to include some examples of, really resilient examples that we see and that are kind of famous. So Allie will go to our first example about resiliency.
Okay. Does anybody know who Michael Jordan is in the room? I'm kidding. I'm sure you do, even if you're not a sports buff. Um, we probably know who Michael Jordan is. And if you know anything about Michael Jordan, you may know that he was famously cut from his high school basketball team. I believe he was a freshman or a sophomore pretty early on. And while that does not mean he didn't have hard days, he probably was very upset about this. Um, this quick story, we all know how it ends. He became probably the most famous basketball player of all time, maybe one of the most famous athletes ever. I mean, he's the logo for Nike now. He's got his logo. We see him everywhere. People compare Michael or use Michael Jordan as the top of the top, cream of the crop. But it didn't come with adversity, and it actually it's a great story of resiliency. This little snippet on the slide here, just talking about how, again, he was famously cut from his basketball team. It ignited his determination and his work ethic, ultimately leading to a legendary career. What is missing from that little story is the hard days, all of the times he doubted himself, all of the speed bumps that he had to go through in order to get there. And so while resiliency, again, sounds very nice, it's we just get back up when we're knocked down. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and a lot of it is mental. The Michael Jordan had to make a lot of mental decisions, personal decisions on what he was going to do with the circumstances he was given. Obviously, he knew he was capable of a lot, and he bet on himself in a lot of different ways. But if he would have listened to his high school basketball coach, I wonder where he would be now. There are a lot of athletes that have faced a lot of determinate or a lot of things as well that lead to them having to work very, very hard in order to get where they are. And many of them do not make it as a career as legendary as Michael Jordan. But it is a prime example of the resiliency of using what you have, pivoting. He had to go through a lot of different emotions, a lot of different feelings, probably felt like he wasn't good enough to be a basketball player at some point. He probably doubted his skills. He probably thought at some point, I should just listen to these people. They know better than I do. But he took a gamble on himself, and that resiliency, that able to spring back into shape, did not go unnoticed, and quite honestly was probably an inspiration to athletes for generations as to how one little thing could very much impact us. That's not to say that we are not impacted by the things that happen around us, but it does not need to be the end all be all. And there's a lot more within our control than sometimes we give ourselves credit for. But just a classic example of resiliency that, in a short story sounds very nice, but when we think about it, he probably had to face a lot and go through a lot in order to get where he needed to go. So that's just one personal example of resiliency. In sports, Valerie will walk us through one of in art.
Yeah, so the next example here we have Frida Kahlo. I'm sure that name is familiar. I don't know how much you guys know about her, but her life was actually marked by a lot of physical and emotionally adversity, and it's another powerful story of resiliency. As a child, she overcame her childhood polio diagnosis, and she had a devastating bus accident later at the age of 18 um, that left her with like a lot of chronic issues, and she at times couldn't walk. She had a lot of physical pain stemming from that bus accident. However, during that time, her art became a form of therapy. And she actually has a quote that I like a lot that she says, I paint myself because I am the subject I know best. And she decided that during that time when she was bedridden right after the accident, she was going to paint as a way to take control when everything else in her life felt like it was out of her control and it felt chaotic to her. And so she started painting, and she actually painted a lot of self-portraits. And through them, she expressed her pain and suffering. And ultimately, she finds, the beauty in her unique and challenging experiences. And, she says that each self-portrait she made was like building herself up piece by piece. And so I think that's a wonderful story of resiliency, of really someone who went through a lot of physical trauma and emotional trauma. And, she really tried to take control of her life through art and cult and creative expression, and really found a way to also share that pain with others and kind of take control of that situation. So that's another lovely example. And we have one more that Allie will talk about.
Yes, community resiliency. Hurricane Katrina is one of the best examples that we have of this. Unfortunately, since Hurricane Katrina, we have many more examples of this. However, if you think back, Hurricane Katrina was uh, a very large, very upsetting natural disaster that obviously nobody planned for, but it sparked a powerful wave of resilience throughout the community. The storm highlighted the importance of community bonds, how we needed to improve our disaster preparedness, and which led to a lot of changes in a lot of major cities around the US. The enduring spirit of those that experienced unimaginable loss. They lost their community, their grocery stores, where the parks that they took their kids to, their schools. A lot of people lost their homes. There's a lot of emotional change, a lot of physical change. One notable example is the Musicians Village, which was a community project that rebuilt homes for musicians and their families. And it really is just a great story of folks coming together to say that we've been through something terrible, that um, while the those lasting impacts of what the negative things that happened, they use that as inspiration to build their resiliency to come back even stronger. And there were so many community organizations that were put into place, so many policies that were changed. Um, and the community bond in New Orleans really changed after this. And we've seen it in a lot of different towns and cities that have had some natural disasters, whether it be floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires. Here in Colorado, we have had a few instances of community resiliency as well that doesn't negate the terrible acts that have happened or the natural disasters that we've seen. But in talking about how do we snap back, how do we come back stronger, we really should look at the entire picture, and the reality of a lot of these situations did bring a lot of good as the years went on, decades later, and really showed us that community resiliency is so valuable. Resiliency in general is such a large thing that we talk about. It's a very abstract idea sometimes, but there are so many examples of community resiliency around us, of individual resiliency. Um, and unfortunately, it comes with a lot of pain and sadness and distress sometimes too. So unfortunately, we can't have one without the other. But we want to talk about some of these things too, because we don't want to shy away from either or the hardships that people feel or face or the adversity. or the resiliency that comes with it too. It's all pretty important. And as humans, we experience these somewhat regularly. And again, it's a lot easier said than done when you put it into these little stories like this. But I'm hoping this at least gave a new framework for resiliency as to why do we keep doing these things, talking about these things, the things that we learn from one another, and the experiences and the resiliency that we can share. Um, Humans are pretty powerful, especially in groups, and we have a lot more power to us than sometimes it feels, especially in these really tough situations. But are there any thoughts about some of these stories? We only have a couple minutes left, but any lingering thoughts about these stories of resiliency? Any feelings or big takeaway aha moments and talking and thinking about these? There may not be. There's some heavy stories here, but um, hopefully it just reframes to the power that we have in our coping skills. And it really, there's a lot that we learn when we get back up after being knocked down.